Age of Mythology is an RTS from 2002, published by Microsoft, and is a part of the Age of Empires series. It has so many things in common with Age of Empires, and if you're a fan of those games, then you're probably familiar with this one. It shares a lot of the same DNA as those games, in that it is a very economic-heavy RTS that utilizes 4 different resource types, which is quite a few for an RTS. It requires a lot of skill and knowledge on what exactly you want to do with your resources because there are so many of them, and there's a lot of different tech upgrades in this game too. I won't say it's the most complex RTS ever made, but it's pretty high up there, especially when you compare it to a game like Battle for Middle-earth 2 that only uses a single resource type. Now don't get me wrong, I love that game too, but Age of Mythology just adds another level of complexity because of how resources have to be managed. It's a constant fight throughout the game to manage your resources while also attacking your enemies. I really like this because it's a somewhat new experience for me. Most other RTSs I've found that after the initial build order and setup of your base, it doesn't take much more than occasional management of your resources to maintain your economy, while Age of Mythology has a much longer path to achieving a full completed base. While this game is heavy on the economic aspects of gameplay, it's also no slouch when it comes time for combat either. This game has a wide variety of units available to each faction, and follows sort of a rock, paper, scissors kind of design, where you have regular units and you have counter units that are meant specially to counter another type of unit. For example, infantry specifically meant to counter cavalry, archers that counter infantry, etc, etc. And what's really cool is that each faction utilizes this system differently, which I'll get into in a moment, but first I wanted to talk about what's, in my opinion, the coolest thing about this game, and that's myth units. You see, while this game does focus a lot on making large armies out of classical units like soldiers, archers, cavalry, and siege, much like Age of Empires does, the thing that separates this game from that, the whole shtick of the game, is that each faction worships a set of gods that gives them a unique set of powers, tech upgrades, and mythical units made of creatures from the lore of said faction. For example, the Greeks have available to them Minotaur, Cyclops, Manticores, Chimeras, and those are just a few of them. There's many more. The Chinese, a couple of their units, they have terracotta men and they have azure dragons, both really cool. The Norse have various giants and trolls at their disposal. The Egyptians, among their many things, include phoenixes, anubites, scarabs, and mummies. And the Atlanteans have dryads, satyrs, lampades, and many more. These myth units are special, strong, and expensive units that usually all have some sort of special ability. These creatures are very cool, very powerful when used in your army, and I just love using them because of that. However, while they can be very powerful and expensive, they're not invincible. In Age of Mythology, there are not only mythic creatures, but there are also heroes, and heroes are designed to do extra damage against myth units, therefore being counters to them. Once again, this goes back to the whole rock, paper, scissors design, where in this system, myth units pummel most regular troops, heroes are going to crush most myth units, and regular troops are usually a better valuable and more spammable than heroes when you're not fighting against myth units. Another cool thing about this game is how every faction gets heroes in a different way. For the Greeks, you get a select set of heroes that are named unique units such as Ajax, Perseus, and other heroes from Greek mythology that you can all buy from your town center. The Chinese are similar, except that their heroes are not unique. There's just a single type of unit called an immortal that you can buy a limited amount of them. And finally, another completely different style from these two would be the Atlanteans. For them, heroes are not unique or limited units. Instead, every regular human troop can be upgraded to a hero troop for a small amount of resources. One of these resources is favor, which is used to buy heroes, myth units, and upgrades. The reason why I bring up favor is because, once again, getting favor is a little bit different for each faction. The Greeks can send their gatherers to temples to pray for favor, the Norse get favor by killing enemies, the Egyptians have to build monuments that generate passive favor, the Chinese get favor by building gardens, and the Atlanteans get it passively from their town centers. The point I'm trying to make telling you all these different things is that this game has a huge amount of differences between the factions. In most RTSs, you'll find that the different factions will have different units and maybe one or two different buildings here and there, but in Age of Mythology, every faction plays completely differently. I said earlier how each faction prays to a set of gods, and yet another cool thing about this game is that you go through different ages. In each age, you unlock new units, buildings, and tech upgrades. However, each age advancement also lets you pick between two different gods to worship, and each one of these gods will give you a different god power, myth unit, and tech. This means that each faction has an absolutely crazy number of sub-factions based on what gods you choose to worship, and this creates an honestly head-spinning amount of choices to choose between. This, combined with the heavy economic focus and the fairly complex combat, means that this is a very deep and complex RTS to understand, simply because there are so many differences and choices to make. I'm the type of guy who loves a ton of choices, so this game is perfect for me. Now that I'm starting to play it, it's quickly becoming one of my favorite RTSs for all the reasons I mentioned above. I love the deep tech tree, the myriad of choices, and I also love this game for its theme. The concept of ancient armies being assisted by some of mythology's greatest monsters, gods, and titans is an absolutely awesome concept. I love an RTS with a good theme, and this game's theme is superb. Overall, Age of Mythology may be an old game, but it's one of the best out there in my opinion, and I honestly wish there was a bigger community around this game. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, it does, but to be honest, I don't get how an older game like Age of Empires 2 has such a huge following while this game doesn't.